Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, we're talking neighbours. You know that sense of community, heartwarming. But you know, we've all had neighbours, right? Who just plain suck. But what if they were much more than that? Because in Florida, come on, where else? In a little old property in Jacksonville, folk had complaints. They didn't know how right they were. So let's give it a go. So it is to Jacksonville that we're off to. The address being 3551 Bowden Circle in South Jacksonville. The House of Horrors. In that leafy suburb, the neighbours knew that address and that occupant all too well. The Tillis family had actually lived there for decades, but it was in 2012 when Russell Tillis reclaimed the family throne that the doo-doo hit the wall, metaphorically speaking. Actually, maybe not just metaphorically speaking. I'll have to check that, because in this house, Russell turned the house into a fortress, making sure no one could see exactly what he was up to in there. But though they couldn't see, they could hear. They could hear screaming. A lot of screaming. The neighbours lived in fear of that house. He would threaten those around him all the time. He'd jump their fences, watch them in their gardens. They were terrified. Women were constantly going to and from the house, some sticking around for a little bit, others never seen again by anybody. There were times when women would run from the Tillis house, naked and screaming for help, banging on neighbours' doors. Not much would be done about that for a long time. And when the police finally did make it inside, they found the house booby-trapped. One officer got a 4-inch nail into his foot. Hidden nail boards were a favourite of Russell's. Also rusty razors, electric wires, all that. He didn't want anybody coming in or going out. But the real horrors were what was going on underneath. So who was/is Russell Tillis? Well, as you can imagine, Russell, he was rusty to his friends. We're fortunate enough to not be counted among that, so it's Russell to us. He had quite the police record going back to his young days, when he was a young fella. Born in 1962, he lived at that same House of Horrors as a kid, growing up there with his brother Claude and his parents. His daddy-o, Claude Sr., was a drunk. He was abusive, sexually abusive even, to his wife and his 2 sons, Claude Jr. and Russell. When Russell's mother, Margie, figured out what her husband was doing to their 2 sons, she made them go live in the trailer out back and told them never to open the door to their dad. As he grew up, Russell turned to petty crimes, drugs. An entire life of crime stretched out before him. On one hand, you gotta say, well, Jesus, fucking hell, he didn't have a chance. On the other, he'll do worse. After growing out of a special school for troubled kids and then juvenile, he decided to up sticks and get as far away from Jacksonville as he could, landing in California in 1981. Russell, with his mother's help, he kicked his drug habit and he wanted to start fresh, California fresh. In California, he met a girl, 16-year-old Shannon Brinkley, 3 years his junior. They hit it off when they met at a social welfare office, and soon were an item, with Shannon eventually becoming pregnant. And as things started out well, they didn't stay that way, they don't usually. Shannon started to, start to suspect something was a little bit off with old Russell. It turned out he was cooking meth, getting high on his own supply. When Shannon discovered this, she took their baby boy and left. And so after that, Russell decided to up sticks once more and head back home to northern Florida. His family, his parents still lived there, his brother lived there, so Russell went back and he set himself up as a handyman, a white van man. Things wouldn't go smoothly from there, let me tell you. This is when the real shit spirals out. In 1989, Russell was charged and convicted of kidnapping. See, one night, Russell was driving along the interstate, and he decided to be a good Samaritan by picking up a lady whose car had broken down. Good Samaritan in the opposite world. He offered to take her to the nearest gas station, but he didn't do that? Nope. Instead, he drove her to a building site he worked at, and then he attacked her. He started choking her and was about to sexually assault her when another car showed up. Now, he was convicted of those charges, but he didn't serve a lick of jail time. I have no idea why. 1989, right? What a time to be alive. Not necessarily a good one. Maybe they thought they would just, scare him straight, turn him into a good boy, a Mahambukal. That's not what happened. They were very wrong. Things continued to get worse. Very worse. In 1993, he did do jail time for burglary. Once released, he was out for an entire year before ending back up in the slammer in 1999. This time for breaking and entering and Grand Theft Auto. He got served with 5 years of his life this time. But, some people, they kind of waste time, faff about while in the pen, right? Do whatever. And not our Russell. He'd use that time to be gooder at being badder. Not by, making connections, getting involved with a gang or anything like that. No. He would learn the law and use it against the law. He'd fight fire with fire, going through and devouring as many legal books as he could in the prison library. He wanted to have all this knowledge so that next time, and he knew there would be a next time, he'd know the law inside and out and use it for his advantage. So he was out in 2004, after which he would do something really horrible. In March 2006, a 14-year-old girl needed a ride home. She had missed the school bus. Russell Tillis happened to be driving by and pulled over. She got in and he drove to a car park, hit her, and told her to strip. She was absolutely terrified, right, as you can imagine. And so she thought to herself, the only way she would be able to survive this was if she told Russell that she was a sex worker and that violence wasn't necessary, she would do whatever he wanted her to do. I told you this was bad. Eventually he dropped her off, not at her real address, and she reported it to the police. A sketch was made up, and they also got Russell's DNA. It was almost 2 years later that they finally brought him in.
I never threatened any of them to ever kill him?
No.
Or beat him up if they didn't do what you said?
No.
He yapped away, saying, he enjoyed the company of sex workers. But he didn't know she was underage. She told him, she was a sex worker. And that was all he needed to know.
So the names don't really mean much. I mean, you pick a girl up, you have sex with her, you drop her off. The name is irrelevant, really.
And the age of the victim? The alleged victim?
Minor. Nowhere near the legal age for you.
He got an entire 4 years for that one. Wow. He got the entire book just fucked at him, right? Unfortunately, the book was about this size, so. When he got out in 2012, he moved back to 3551 Bowden Circle. He turned it into a castle, a shite castle. For the next 3 years, police would be called there over 80 times. Neighbours would constantly hear machinery, drilling, and, screaming. The neighbours lived in fear. Some even filed injunctions for protection against Russell. He would threaten to kill them on the reg. The police were not the most helpful about this. They haven't actually been throughout this entire story. They would be called to his house so often they would stop giving a shit. As I said at the beginning, Russell would often call ladies of the night over, sex workers. Some would be addicts. He would get others to be smurfs, which basically They would go to pharmacies and buy stuff he needed to make drugs. Yeah, he's back. Time to cook. But on more than one occasion, Russell's helpers slash sex workers slash addicts, they would wake up in Russell's house chained to a bed, and Russell would do what Russell does. He would keep them as sex slaves in his house, only escaping when, Russell would forget to do the locks all the way. Twice, they would manage to escape naked and screaming, banging on the neighbours' doors, telling them that Russell was gonna kill them. What happened? Sweet fuck all. A major part of this right here is, what are called the less dead. Sex workers, when they're found murdered, the police don't really look into it too hard. So if they start reporting, stuff happening like this and that they're being, almost murdered, they don't really care. And when it came to Russell, they doubly didn't care. Another time, a neighbour, hearing screams coming from Russell's house, called the police, called 911. No officer ever showed up, and the screams eventually stopped. It was in 2015 that Russell was finally arrested for the final time, with great difficulty, as you will see. And when he was finally arrested, right, it wasn't for abuse, assault, attempted murder, sexual assault, anything like that. No. It was for violating neighbours' restraining orders. See, remember his house was booby-trapped, right? Nails, boards, razors. The first few times police rocked up, he would scurry away into his house like a rat. Police who followed would step on 4-inch rusty nails. So on the night of May 28, 2015, the police said, fuck that, we're not going in there, we'll lure him out, lure him into a trap. They started throwing rocks at his gaff, hoping, he might pop the head out, have a go, see what this ruckus was about. And he did. Then what happened, it's kind of disputed, right? Here's some clips of what each side says happened then.
Officers went to a residence at 3551 Bowden Circle East to arrest Russell David Tillis, a white male, age 55, who had 2 outstanding misdemeanor warrants. During this incident, when the officers were there, Russell Tillis armed himself with 2 knives and then began to violently resist arrest with the officers. He was taken into custody. He was charged with aggravated assault, battery on a law enforcement officer, and several additional charges at that time.
The police said he ran at them with knives and they got into a struggle. Russell was then charged with aggravated assault on law enforcement officers, resisting arrest, and battery of an officer. All the charges combined would be a life sentence at Russell's age. So that's what they say happened, and even though they had pepper spray, tasers, and pistols, they didn't use them on a guy they say charged at them with knives. Russell said he ran away from them. He got scared because they didn't identify themselves as police. They caught him and beat the ever-living shit out of him.
Well, the cops appeared across the street from my house about 1 o'clock in the morning, dressed in all black, not marked as police officers. They threw 1-pound rocks over the fence on top of a metal roof of my home. When I come out to investigate the disturbance, they were hiding in the bushes. They made a rush attempt to grab me, and I ran. I didn't know who it was. They ran me down and beat me up. And I believe that's the photograph the state showed the jury. Leaves all in my hair, dirt on my shoulder. I got beat up pretty good. Okay. They found a knife in my pocket and another knife that was on me. They charged me with holding them at knife point in front of my house. It was a horrendous ordeal.
Now Russell was charged with hefty charges, to be fair, but in the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't really matter. So Russell was now in jail, right, 2015, going into 2016, on myriad charges. And it appears, while in jail, he became a little depressed. Boo-hoo. I'm sure his victims will take great solace in that. At one point, he genuinely was hospitalized after overdosing on antidepressants.
Yeah, the depression was present from the arrest, but escalated very quickly in the first 3-4 months. So I would trade a tray of food for, I think it was 100 milligrams of Elavil. So I traded about, 10 trays of food, got me about 1,000 milligrams, and I ate them. all 1,000 milligrams. I figured that was enough to kill me.
And after that, right, bright spark, he had an idea. Now this is either the greatest idea or the shittiest, but I guarantee, my friends, you have not heard of one quite like this before. So as I said, Russell, around the time, talking early 2016, he had been in jail, maybe 7 months, and he was feeling blue, you know. We all get down from time to time, but it had nothing to do with the acts he had committed, let me tell you. That's not why he was feeling a little bit, you know. Russell went to another inmate, a fella named Sammy Evans. Sammy was in jail facing a life sentence of his own, so Russell thought they could help each other. After all, Russell, you know, remember, he knew all about the law, beefing up his knowledge over the years. So Russell went to Sammy and said, hey, I'll help your case. I'll help your case, you know, using my law knowledge if you help me. Help me get the death penalty.
And I want the death penalty because I'm fixing to get this 30 years and I don't want to die a slow death in prison. I was 55 at the time. I've lived a pretty good life. I figured I'll get the death penalty and I won't die that slow death in prison. Well, Evans was cooperative with that, but at first he was a little hesitant. He's like, first you have to understand, it's not normally something someone would walk up to you and say, I want you to go get the wire and I want to confess to you. And the first question was, why don't you just tell the police? What do you need me for? I mean, that's the logical inference of a conversation like that.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, I told him pretty much the details of it. Murder itself does not always constitute a death penalty. You have to have aggravating factors. And I have knowledge of the law. I mean, I'm not that smart, but I do have some workable knowledge of the law. I know about aggravators. I know about the law. I know how to read the law. I know what kind of murder it takes to get the death penalty. And I know what kind of murder would be rejected. If you wanted to say you committed a murder and you wanted the death penalty, and you said, well, I committed a murder, well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the death penalty. You must have some serious, heinous, aggravating factors. And I'm knowledgeable of that sort of thing.
Russell came up with a plan to confess to some cooked up, heinous crimes that would get him the injection, instead of slowly dying behind bars for 30 years on the aggravated assault charges and all that. Now this part, it's kind of interesting because in my opinion, these crimes are not cooked up at all. This is real. He was going to confess, not as, some kind of act of contrition, but because he just was not arsed. Slowly rotting away in prison for the rest of his miserable life. So Russell got Sammy to write a letter to the police about a, homicide, right? Sammy was then wired up, by the detectives, and on the 5th of February 2016, he passed Russell a note in jail saying, I'm wired. It's go time. And so Russell started talking. Here's the transcripts. He told of how he would lock women in the soundproofed torture chamber in his house, and he would have other guys come over to, rape them, including his brother Claude. Other times, these Johns would come over to torture these women, break their faces, pull out teeth. He would charge for this. Sometimes he would let them go after a week or so. He knew the police wouldn't come knocking, they didn't care. Other times he would kill them and chop them up, disposing of them around Jacksonville. He told of one time when his brother Claude came over for a woman, and she recognized Claude. Remember, Claude lived there his whole life. And so, Claude forced Russell to kill this woman. Russell did kill her, and Claude dismembered her. Then he buried her in the yard, instead of dumping her remains around town. His number of dead women was between 3 and 6. It's pretty shocking stuff. You can read through the entire transcript. It's in the sources down below. Russell, he talked about kidnapping, sexual assault, sex trafficking, multiple murders, and dismemberments. But here's the problem. Was this true or was this false? Russell was a pathological liar his entire life. Russell drew Sammy a map of the house at Bowden Circle, and described where there was a body. This made its way back to the police, and they got a warrant to search the property. And guess what? They found a body. With the help of DNA, it was determined to be that of Joni Lynn Gunter. Joni was from Gainesville, born in '84. She had 2 siblings, and they lived with their mother until she passed away in a car accident. Their grandparents applied for custody, but it was refused as they were unemployed, so they went into foster care. They moved around quite a bit, and they remained close. Unfortunately, Joni, she got into drugs at a young age and eventually turned to sex work. She lived on the streets and would disappear from time to time, until in 2014 she disappeared for longer than usual, and eventually turned up in Russell's garden. The autopsy report showed that Joni's cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head, at least 5. She also had fractured bones in her hands that showed, well, they were defensive. She is believed to have been murdered between February 2014 and May 2015. She was dismembered, and in that shallow grave were hammers and saws. Now Russell was charged with first-degree murder.
He was a menace, according to neighbors, a source of threats, harassment, and obscene signs.
It was very nice and quiet until he came to the neighborhood. We've lived 4 years in horror.
The fear he instilled only grew last winter when police found a body buried in his backyard.
I have no clue who it is. I'm sure that Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has done some sort of intense investigation trying to determine the identity of that person, but me personally, I don't know.
What was your reaction to human remains being found on your property?
It was kind of a numbness feeling.
Why?
Surprised. So, it's just kind of numbness.
And he had a change of heart. Remember, the only reason they found that body was because Russell, he wanted to. He showed them where it was. He wanted to get death.
Do you know how they ended up buried on your property?
That's the second time you've asked me that question.
Are you able to answer it?
Ma'am?
Can you answer it?
Well, not in full elaboration like you want me to, no, because I must wait on pending charges, if there will be any at all filed, before any of that comes out.
Did you murder the woman who was found buried in your backyard?
No, I did not, nor have I murdered anybody else.
And did you have anything to do with those human remains ending up on your property?
That remains to be seen in the future.
Meaning what?
Meaning that.
He was obviously feeling a little brighter now, sun's shining, because now he was saying his brother did it. His brother killed her, even though he previously said he killed her. Yep, now Claude killed her, and he dismembered her, when previously it was the other way around. So hard to tell what's true and what's false. He said during the trial, I was depressed back then. I wanted you guys to kill me. It's all lies.
And I have enough knowledge of the police in Duval County to know that once they find a body, the rush to justice, they don't care about any other facts, like finding Dave, finding Jimmy, the other multiple murders. They don't care anything about that. They got the body, they got the confession, and they rushed to justice. I relied upon that. That was all fictitious. The kidnappings, the other murders, the torture, the soundproof room, those were the aggravating factors that I had created that would get me the death penalty. I couldn't just say, well, I know where her body's at and I killed this girl.
Right.
Because then I'm not going to get the death penalty.
Right. So the sex trafficking, was there ever any sex trafficking in your house?
No, absolutely not.
No human trafficking in those
None,
homes?
no. There was none of that going on in that house.
Yes. Was there a...
Claude was questioned about this, and he denied having anything to do with Russell. He said he was scared of Russell, never wanted anything to do with him, never visited him.
One way or the other, I don't care how bad I feel about you and the things you've done to me over the years and the things I've done to you, and this is not something I would do to you. I just wouldn't do it.
Knew nothing about sex slaves, torture chambers, Joni Lynn Gunter, nothing. After all, in the tapes, Russell said Joni was the person who recognized Claude, hence her murder.
They said they found the body over there. I'm having problems getting out of here now. They seem to think for some reason I had something to do with it. I don't know.
Just hear me out.
Right.
You know, I know some bad happened at your mom's house.
God, I don't know nothing about it.
Well, listen. We know more than what you think we know already.
Well, I
Why else do you think we would have you here?
I don't know. Honest to God, other than well, look, I'll give you your DNA. I got no problem with that because, like I said, I ain't done nothing. I know.
Let me get this consent.
Tell me about this room, this soundproof room.
I don't know anything about a freaking soundproof room. I told you I ain't been in that house the whole time he was lived in it. I damn sure don't know nothing about no dismembering, no freaking body. Oh man.
Should we listen to your brother when he says you're the monster and not him? These things that were intended, meant to happen, or they just, what?
I would like an attorney present.
At the trial, which went ahead in 2021, nearly everyone who was involved with Russell came forward and testified. Shannon, his partner from California, the two victims of his drive-by kidnappings, his son, his brother. When it was Russell's time to testify, he took the stand. He happily took the stand and told his version of how Joni Lynn Gunter ended up in his yard. He said his brother Claude showed up at the house out of the blue one day with a dead Joni Lynn Gunter in the boot. He said he didn't know how she died. He didn't even know her name until she was ID'd. And together they dismembered her and buried her. The reason was he was close with his brother and wanted to cover for him.
So he gets out of the car and he wants me to help him with a problem. He goes around to the back of the car and he opens the trunk. And that's the first time I seen Joni Gunter. She was in the trunk and there was a mass amount of blood on her chest when she was dead. He wanted me to get in the car with him and help him go down the street and dispose of her. But I wouldn't get in the car. And I told him, I'm not getting in the car. Absolutely not.
The police fully investigated Claude Tillis and found there was no truth to Russell's story. Shannon actually said something really important during the trial. She said that Russell felt a thrill and was proud of himself for deceiving people.
He struck me as the kind of person who, he liked to tell stories about times that he got away with stuff. He seemed to get a little bit of a thrill from getting away with stuff, like outsmarting people. And I remember him telling stories, to that effect. And I was like, what? I always wondered why, that was so important to him.
And that's just what he tried to pull off. But, thankfully, he failed this time. Womp womp.
State of Florida versus Russell David Tillis. Verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
He was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder, as well as abuse of a dead body and kidnapping. The human trafficking charge was inconclusive, as there was no evidence it actually happened. The people in his stories were never questioned if they actually existed at all. Then came the question, did Russell deserve the death penalty or not? One which he had been dying to get, but now wasn't really a fan. Not for me. In the end, the verdict wasn't unanimous, which it needs to be. So instead, he got 2 life sentences plus 30 years. I wonder if he ever really wanted it even to begin with, or if it was all a game to him. I mean, he was pleading not guilty during the trial, which would get the death penalty. It's so hard to make sense of him at all. Maybe it was all to give himself time behind bars and try to use his knowledge to get away with his crimes, using, little loopholes in the system. While the police searched the House of Horrors, they found plenty and plenty of women's belongings, adding some truth to his torture chamber stories, as well as a faded Polaroid photo of a young woman. To this day, police are looking for any information about this woman. No one knows who she is or what became of her. It's a crazy story of what I believe to be a serial killer. I do believe his stories that he was murdering women and chopping them up. Now, they didn't find any more bodies in his house of horrors, and they thoroughly looked. It's, by the way, the house has been destroyed now. But he said, he had dumped them all around the place anyway. It doesn't take much of a push to get from what he was proven to have done to, well, much, much worse. And Russell, who said he didn't want the death penalty, he didn't want to, rot away in prison for the rest of his days, well, his little plan kind of backfired on him, because now he will rot away in prison for the rest of his days, the old bastard. Russell Tillis? Russell fucking Gobshite. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Here, go on. I'll see you as always real soon in the next old video. Till then, please look after yourselves. Stay safe. I love you. Mike out.